Well, good afternoon, and I can't tell you how excited I am to have Peter Afflerbach with us today, Reading Hall of Fame. Now, how's that? AERA Research Fellow. How's that? And author of a new book that's all about teaching readers and not teaching reading. So I know Peter will have a lot to say. I'll start by saying, hey, tell us something about more about yourself. But actually, that's kind of like, eh, who needs to say anything more after you say that? But tell us a little more about yourself, uh, and then we'll get into your book.
Okay, so thanks so much, Sam, for that intro and for inviting me to speak today. I, you know, I'm, I appreciate you mentioning the Hall of Fame and the AERA Research Fellow, but a lot of what I talk about comes from experiences as being a classroom teacher. I was a K through 6 remedial reading teacher. I was a middle school remedial reading and remedial writing teacher and a high school English teacher. And I've also directed 2 university reading clinics and have done quite a bit of research on things like reading comprehension. And those experiences combined are really what I think makes me who I am today. I guess being invited here, those things all sum to something. And I feel like I've been able to sort of synthesize a lot of my learnings and understandings, as well as my strong feelings about um, the way that children develop their literacy and how they become readers, how they become enthusiastic readers. So that's thus the title of the book, which is Teaching Readers, Not Teaching Reading.
And by the way, I so love the title of that book. Okay, well, let's get into it then. The first two questions: what motivated you to write this book? What impact did you hope that it would have in the professional world? And you write about the need to shift from science of reading to sciences of reading. Can you explain what that's all about and why the plural sciences? So that'll be the first two things to take on.
Yeah, sure. So I I as I mentioned earlier, I've done a bunch of work on the cognitive side of reading. My research in the past has looked at reading comprehension strategies. With the idea that if we understand really good readers' strategic reading, we may be able to think about how to best teach reading comprehension strategies to children or other developing readers. But in my experience as a teacher and researcher, I've also learned something that I think I knew my first year teaching, which things like a student's motivation and engagement, a student's metacognition, and the student's self-efficacy or lack of self-efficacy have very, very influential bearing on whether or not a child develops as a reader and whether or not a child ultimately achieves as a reader. And so the book that I'll talk about really today, Teaching Readers Not Reading, comes from this idea that I find too much reading curricula is limited to the cognitive strategy and skill side of reading development. And that's at the expense of things that are well documented and well researched. To be very honest, I find it puzzling that these things seem to be left out of the equation of how a student becomes an avid, successful reader. Um, Jumping to that idea of moving from a singular science of reading to a plural sciences of reading, I worry, and I think a good example of my worry comes from some of the Facebook community groups that I belong to, where practicing teachers will ask a question and pose a problem about a particular student, and many, if not all, of the responses, depending on the community, are about, well, this child needs this strategy instruction or needs to learn this skill. And while I'm a proponent of strategy and skill instruction, I would never think that that's sufficient to create an independent and successful reader. So if we move beyond the science of reading, which I would claim right now seems to be very tightly constrained, with a focus on the 5 strategies or skills that were initially laid out by the report of the National Reading Panel, which, by the way, is almost a quarter of a century old. I'd argue that in a quarter of a century, any science that is vibrant will be evolving. And I'll make a claim that why we need sciences of reading is that the science of metacognition, the science of motivation and engagement, and the science of self-efficacy are well developed, and they bring to us as teachers and developers of reading curriculum a wonderful thing, which is added insight into how we help kids grow. We don't have to look very far, I don't think, to understand the value of a thing like metacognition or motivation and engagement. It's that I think in the past, some people have claimed that, that's more like intuition. We intuit that kids need to be motivated. We intuit that they should be independent, and therefore we can infer that metacognition is working. But there are journals dedicated to the science of motivation and learning. There are journals dedicated to metacognition and learning. And for us not to reference all of the wonderful research that's being done in those fields, I think keeps us constrained by this idea of a single science of reading, and keeps us away from benefiting of the knowledge that's provided by the sciences of reading. So that's the singular plural distinction there.
Okay. And you're a man after my own heart. One of my mantras for a while now has been look at all of the research. And when you look at all the research, your answers are somewhat different. Before I move on to the next question, I myself taught quite a number of reading courses, and people first coming into a reading course don't always know metacognition and what that's about. Could you give us like a Cliff's note on that real quick?
Yeah, sure. Well, so metacognition is really a really wonderful thing that human beings are capable of, and it's about understanding how we think and gaining control over our cognitive actions, gaining control over our thinking. The way that we might try to introduce this to struggling readers, for example, in the reading clinic, is we ask them fairly straightforward and, for us, simple sentences, simple questions. They might not be simple for answers when it comes to a struggling student reader. But when we get students in the habit of asking, does that make sense, when they finish reading a sentence, what we're doing is we're planting a nice little seed of metacognition, which over time and with practice, it becomes an automatic thing. Like, for example, when you or I, Sam, are reading something and it's difficult, we will automatically, based on metacognition, decide to reread or to slow down, or both, because we understand that we're having difficulty constructing meaning. And it's that metacognition. It's kind of like the little invisible thing that sits on our shoulder and helps us manage what can be simple, but then increasingly complex acts of reading. And not just the acts of reading, but I think good reading instruction always wants children to use that which they have understood. So it's not just about text comprehension, but it's about task management. Like, what do we ask kids to do with what they've understood from text? So metacognition is really about being in control of one's reading, and it's a prerequisite for any independent and any successful reading that our students do. Without metacognition, our students are dependent on people like us, the teacher, to tell them how they're doing. And that's not what we want. We want them leaving our classroom the last time in June or whatever the school year ends, confident and being able to pick something up and set a goal and read it successfully. So.
Yeah, I sometimes tell my free service teachers, we're teaching them how to think, not what to think. And that's a key, how to think. Okay, now on to your next question. You focus on the sciences of reading that include metacognition, motivation, engagement, and self-efficacy. Can you describe how these operate and why they are central to the development, to reading development and reading achievement? It's all yours.
Yeah. Well, let me reverse the order there. I think let's start with self-efficacy. The idea of self-efficacy to me comes down to are my students believing in themselves when they approach an act of reading, whether they choose it themselves or whether we ask them or require them to partake of it in a classroom. And I think self-efficacy is one of those markers that really distinguishes our wildly successful readers from our struggling readers. And part of it is reflected in what might be called a can-do attitude for kids with high self-efficacy. For kids with low self-efficacy, what typically happens is that a history of not doing as well as is hoped. And that might be based on the child's own expectations or the teachers or the parents' expectations, or a child comparing herself or himself or their self to a classmate, to a peer group. And for our most struggling readers, this is a message that may be unfortunately reinforced every day. And that is, you're not doing as well as your peers, you're not doing as well as your classmates. And and I'm sure you've noticed that you're not in the high flying reading group, you're in the low group. And what that does is, like I think of it this way: when I've worked with, let's say, fourth graders in a reading clinic, and they have been members of the low reading group since kindergarten or first grade, that to me, that means they have spent nearly or actually half of their lives in a low reader group. And that sends a message, whether or not it's voiced or unvoiced, that you're not doing so well. And so I'm not surprised when a lot of those children don't have high self-efficacy, which means that when asked to read, they quite frequently do not believe that they'll be able to succeed. And it's human nature to try to avoid or work around or get lost around a task where you don't believe you'll succeed. As adults, we're really fortunate. Like my place for low self-efficacy is the Department of Motor Vehicles. I know that when I go in there, things are not going to work out well. And I've lived in 4 different states, so I can't be online for this. I have to go in and actually get the license or get the registration. And my past history with Department of Motor Vehicles is I'm going to get in the wrong line. I'm going to get the wrong information. I'm going to have the wrong form. And what should be a 30-minute thing turns into a 3-hour thing. Most of the time, adults can opt out of situations where they don't believe they'll succeed, but our children don't have that opportunity. And so one of the things that I think is so essential in reading classrooms is to follow that old saying that nothing succeeds like success. And at whatever level that is, it's really important that our children experience success, or they will not be able to build up that idea that they can succeed. So that's like one of the fundamentals of the research on self-efficacy, is that it's really important that students feel agency, that they are able to take on a task independently and succeed at it. And so when I see ideas that the way that we help kids get better with this cognitive skill of reading is just reteach it and reteach it. Now, if a child has failed the first time through or the second time through, self-efficacy theory would be throwing up a huge question mark to whoever is doing this reteaching, saying, have you thought about this other science of reading or an affiliated science of reading that says this is not going to work because the child does not believe in success on the horizon, right? So to me, that's self-efficacy. Motivation and engagement. I think all of us can look into our past, think about the most motivated learning that we've ever done in regards to a particular teacher. And when we think about that teacher or that group of teachers, something that jumps out is they were able to motivate us, one way or another. They got us so interested in learning. And the science of motivation and engagement is widely developed. It's widely developed in reading. It's widely developed in education and learning and teaching and learning. And so if we're not sensitive to the motivational needs of our students, and we're not designing an instruction that not only is planned to deliver important strategy and skill, but also planned to be motivating and engaging, I fear that our best lesson plans may fall flat. You know, there's the best lesson plan in the world is not going to be successful if children from the get-go are not motivated to attend. You know, that's pretty basic educational psychology 101. So again, to leave out something as powerful as motivation and engagement from the sense of a science of reading is, I can't come up with a decent explanation for it. It's very puzzling for me. And then the third thing would be metacognition, which we've already been over a bit, but you know, there's not a single reader in the history of reading across the globe who has ever been independent and successful without being metacognitive. And that's a given. There's loads of experiments that demonstrate that a child who's not metacognitive is going to be dependent on someone else to help them. And so if we look at these, you know, the five big things from the National Reading Panel report that turned into the five pillars of No Child Left Behind, you know, I'm arguing strongly that there's got to be at least three more pillars, and that would be self-efficacy, motivation, engagement, and metacognition. But we want kids to be able to pick up a book, to set a goal for reading, to monitor their progress, to monitor their comprehension, and get through, and to be able to evaluate on their own how well they've made progress towards their goal. And that's, you know, progress being monitored in the moment, like in the middle of a sentence when they encounter a difficult word, but also stepping back and saying, well, I was reading this because I really want to learn how to like build a model. And so did I read well enough to do that? That's what accomplished readers do all the time. And we certainly want our students to be moving in that direction.
Okay.
So instruction related to metacognition is so important. Instruction that engages and motivates students is so important. And our classroom environments and our teaching that helps students build positive self-efficacy is, I would say, the third of that triumvirate of really, really important things that sometimes is missing in the classroom.
Okay. And a mental note here, and I know you know Nell Duke because you're about to co-present with her, that she has a model that has added to the rope considerably, very much doing some of the things you're talking about. So I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sam, you know, the whole idea of that, the reading rope, you know, Hollis Scarbo did a really nice job of, you know, like taking the simple view of reading, a simple model of reading, and parsing out the different things that have to be there for the simple model of reading to work. You know, what I'm suggesting here is that there's no, you know, throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but the rope to me on its own does not tell the story of successful reading instruction, and it does not tell the story of successful learning to be a reader. It includes very necessary components, but that, you know, we could think about if you've ever seen the cable of a suspension bridge, there's lots of rope and lots of wires wrapped around one another. And, you know, I'd say the Scarbo's reading rope is a really important core to any reading program, but it needs a wraparound, and it needs, you know, a wraparound with not only metacognition, motivation, engagement, self-efficacy, but it needs a wraparound in terms of how do we help kids develop their digital literacy strategies and skills, and how do we help them become strategic readers and critical readers, and you know, how do we help them make the right attributions for their failures and successes as they develop as readers. So
Okay, well, you're increasing my need to be a fly on the wall when you and Nell Duke present there at that conference, and we'll have links to all the conferences that you're going to be presenting at in the blog. Okay, do you believe that current reading instruction reflects the breadth and depth of our knowledge of how student reading develops? And what explains the phenomenon of understanding reading development broadly, but teaching reading narrowly? And then the other question was, from a developmental perspective, what else matters for student reading success besides strategies and skills? And I think you've touched on some of that already, but those are your next two things to deal with.
yeah, okay, thanks, Sam. So I would say, um, if you are using a reading program, or if you're shopping around for a reading program, and you pick it up and examine it, you scrutinize it, which is really important. If all that you find are strategies and skills, I'd say you're halfway home there. Um, I would never ever argue against the value and the essential nature of strategies and skills, but I'd also argue strongly that they will never be enough to help all kids reach their reading potential. And the unfortunately, I believe that most reading series um, either have an exclusive or hyper focus on strategies and skills, and there's a number of reasons for that. One is that's what we're used to, and like there's the status quo of a lot of reading instruction is to have really complete and really detailed scope and sequence charts for reading strategies and skills, which I think is a good thing. Um, we have a testing industry, a testing regimen in the United States that is really important because the test scores are used to judge teacher goodness, student achievement, and school quality. Of course, those tests focus only on a product, which would be kids' reading comprehension scores, and at more developmental levels, their ability to blend triple consonants or recognize schwas and things like that. Those are important also. But when our only valued indicators are things like percentile rankings, Stanine scores, or raw scores, and when the only sense of school advancement and children's achievement is a test score, we trade off, and the things that we lose in that trade off are how about this as a really important assessment? Has a child gone from a non-reader or a reluctant reader to an enthusiastic reader? Um, how about has a child grown self-efficacy to believe that he can succeed when at the beginning of the year, the last thing he wanted to do was try to read because he expected to fail? And to move over to metacognition, um, have our students learned to independently select, read through, and successfully complete a text of their liking, or that we assign to them? Because we know that sometimes in school you have to read stuff because it's assigned, not because you love it, right? So, those are three examples of stuff that we don't assess, and test scores are really the coin of the realm. Those are the things that are used to describe progress and achievement. And so the fact that test scores revolve around strategy and skill is reflected in the reality of most reading programs that are strategy and skill focused. So,
Okay, well, let's get into the final question here, and I need to do something. Here we go. Um, I a lot of my uh, audience in my blog are practicing teachers, and what they're always looking for is, I always talk about the convention presentations where you take something home that you can use on Monday. So I'm kind of like wondering, what are some of the big takeaways from your book that teachers could take home and use on Monday when school starts again? And what is your message from the heart? What would you like every teacher to keep in mind from this overall
oh,
wonderful message you're giving? Okay,
yeah.
so those are the last two. There you go.
Well, thanks, Sam. Like let me get to the last part first. The message from the heart is, all of us who teach children, and those of us who teach children and undergraduates and graduate students know that we're dealing with individuals who have individual differences, and we should be comfortable with the statement that it's not a one size fits all deal when it comes to effective instruction. And the idea of teaching readers is one that encourages us to think about where are the places we can connect with students and how can we optimize our instruction with the hope that it optimizes our students' learning by having a fuller consideration of what matters in the teaching of reading, and I would say the teaching of readers. And the the thing that I value about the book that I wrote, Teaching Readers, Not Teaching Reading, is it comes from this perspective. I would never want to be some academic who gets on your blog or is given a talk at a conference that says there's a lot of really good research out here that says this is important. And see ya, thanks for coming to my talk. But what I try to do, and I think I've succeeded in the book, is that with the chapters on motivation and engagement, metacognition, self-efficacy, there are also chapters on the development of children's epistemic knowledge and a chapter on the development of student attributions. I have fairly extensive sections in each of those chapters that describe the classroom environments and the instructional strategies that help take the science and bring it to children and try to help them thrive as readers, as informed by this much more broad perspective on what matters in human development, and in this case, literacy and reading development.
Okay. Well, first of all, as a teacher, I know that your book is going to be a wonderful source of making my lesson planning even better. I still do. I'm sort of I've flunked retirement. Okay, so sorry. But bottom line is, I still also work with a few teachers, and when I share your book with them, I know that how they go about doing their lesson planning and lesson plans will be very different from what they might have been doing before. So that's a really great thing. So this is your chance for any last, so can't wait to start sharing some of this in the fall. Please do give yourself a plug about the two conventions you're going to be speaking at. With that, it's kind of like any final thoughts after you give yourself a plug. You got to tell us about the two conventions you're going to be at.
Sure. Well, thank you, Sam. I believe the book is being well received. I've been asked to give a keynote at the Florida Reading Association in Orlando in January of 2023. And I've also been asked to give a keynote at LitCon, which is also in January 2023 in Columbus, Ohio. And I appreciate, I know like LitCon and Florida Reading Association have some overlap in a Venn diagram, but they have also have some different members. So I've been very pleased with the reception of the book and the appeal of the book. And I've given, I think 4 keynotes already just since the book came out on the book. So I'm that's why you write a book, right? You hope that people value your message, and I've been very humbled by the reception so far, and I just hope it makes a difference for kids, because that's why we got into this stuff in the first place, and hopefully our accumulated knowledge matters at some point, and that's what I'm banking on here.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview and sharing that. There'll be links to the book. There'll be links to your conventions and any other things that'll be coming out this weekend. And now there is a final silly tradition on Bomarito blog interview, and that is we do a Zoom wave goodbye.
Okay.
Wave goodbye. Bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sam. Okay. Have a great day.